So I'm a professor at UCL, very similar to everything Ed said. I also have a baby I'm going to have to rush off at home to sort out very soon. But what I spend a lot of my time doing is putting people into these massive objects that are incredibly dangerous. Dangerous if you have a pacemaker or any metal in your body, but these are magnetic resonance imaging scanners. So the reason I'm putting people like this man here into an MRI scanner is I want to find out how the brain is reacting to space, how we're using our brain to navigate environments. And the more I've done this work, the more I thought I need to be speaking to people like yourselves. Because in the neurosciences, we're obsessed with how tiny little things happen in the lab, but they don't relate to things like you've just been talking about, the pain of potholes or decisions and all sorts of urban environment issues. So I'm going to just talk about two studies we've published in the last few years that relate to things I hope you'll be interested in. First one is we thought, well, let's get out of the standard paradigm. Let's take students to really complicate a bit of the urban environment in London, to Soho, people that don't know anything about Soho virgins. They do nothing, train them like taxi drivers to learn these streets, and then we'll lie them inside here, and they'll experience, rather than dragging that around the whole of London, this thing, impossible, we'll drag London inside this brain scanner. So we took a professional film crew, shot Soho, put it inside the MRI scanner, scan people's brains, and we can look at how their brain reacts to the city as they move around. And there's lots of questions you can ask. The question I wanted to know was this: how does this street network in London affect your brain as you're navigating through it? You could take, Bria could take you around and go, so what's happening now? Tell me every second what's happening to you. 5 seconds later, you'd be exhausted trying to tell me. With the brain, we can collect thousands of measurements every second to find out what it is doing, and that tells us a lot more about this urban environment. So what we're measuring here, this little white area is the area we scan people's brains as they navigated around inside this film. And what we're measuring here is how close a given street is to the entire street network. So this is the closeness centrality in graph theoretic measures. So you can see Oxford Street is really high, it's highly connected. In fact, the most connected bit is probably something like 7 Dials, or somewhere in the middle of London, Charing Cross, really connected to the network. Does that drive somewhere in your brain? That will help us advance neuroscience, but also understands how our brain reacts to cities. Another measure is how much you would go between a given street if you're taking a journey in London. So if you're cycling on some horrible journey, as I used to have to do from East London up to home, there's certain streets that you would go through a lot, shown in red here, and other streets you wouldn't. So the bridges get picked out, Oxford Street, various other streets. Does this drive brain activity? What does our brain do with this? The final measure we looked at was what's known as the degree centrality. How many degrees of freedom, effectively, do I have in a given street? So 7 Dials, there's 6 ways of getting out of 7 Dials, but there's a lot of dead ends in the south of London. So these are the blue dead ends, and they're scattered across the city. So we looked in the brain, and what we found, and here is Soho, is an axiometric projection of Soho. We looked at pathways as people are finding their way through from Soho Square to some art shop, for example. And we measured what these properties of the city are, and then took our measurements of people's brains, and we were able to find out, here's a particular bit of the brain, it likes responding to these things. And there's also there's a whole load of brain areas. What we found interesting with this, otherwise we wouldn't be talking about it, is that this particular bit that's most active when you are trying to find your way through Soho is the same bit of the brain that gets bigger in London taxi drivers the longer they have spent navigating London streets. And we know that if you were to remove that hippocampus surgically, you will have amnesia. You won't remember any way you can travel through a city. So we know this is important, but there's a lot of areas here. And what we're able to see is that these areas at the back of your brain, they're active no matter what you're doing. It doesn't matter what you're doing passing through these streets. This particular bit that gets bigger in London taxi drivers is the only bit of the brain that's more active when you step into a highly connected street when you're navigating. It's shut down effectively. There's no activity there when you're guided by a sat-nav. And so all sorts of newspapers jumped on this, MIT Tech Review, everyone, wow, brain turns off when you use a sat-nav. Not good. But it's a bit more elaborate than that. We can find it only is active, this bit that's guiding this analysis of the streets, only active when you step into it. When I leave this room, my brain will be active, but not when I'm traveling or when I'm making decisions. That's what this plot is showing. And so this plot showing this is the activity here is driven by the local connections, the posterior hippocampus, bigger in taxi drivers. But in fact, there's a part of your brain that gets more forward to that, inside this brain area, the hippocampus, that really likes the closeness of the streets. How close you are to anywhere. Can I basically escape from where I am to anywhere? So we can take that kind of measurement and say to a city planner, if you build a city, what will this bit of your brain do? So for example, here's 3 cities. Here's Lisbon, Manhattan, and Warsaw. This is what your brain would do, this particular tiny bit of your brain would do if you're sitting in these cities when you're navigating around. If you're using a sat-nav, blank. These bits of, sorry, I'm just moving off the red dot. So these are pretty much blank. So this is great, it's telling us how the brain interacts. We can't ask, people don't know their brain is doing this, but we're able to use these methods to understand and tell urban planners. And this is important because if you have dementia or some other condition or you're not very good at navigating, these sort of information, separate information is very useful if you want to understand particular populations. So that's work we do with brain scanners. And the second part of this, the last few minutes I've got, is to say I was very lucky with Ed Manley and other people to be funded with 10 million euros to set up a project to find out, well, how do people in the entire world navigate? Why are some people good at navigating cities? Why are some people bad at navigating cities? Could we find out? Deutsche Telekom, T-Mobile, decided they would run that as a major campaign, use that to promote their brand, here's T-Mobile, by creating a game we generated as part of research. Rather than using an MRI scanner, we're now using mobile phones. We created a game called See Hero Quest, which I'm now going to show you on the next slide. This is what views inside the game look like, but I'll go to the next slide and start the movie. So this is a long story. Here's a paper we published last year. So in this game, you play on your mobile phone, you see a sequence of checkpoints to get to. You play a little boat, and you just with one thumb tap left or right to move this boat around. You've got to find various checkpoints like this. And remember that I need to go left here, for example, and find this. It builds slowly from very, very easy levels. This is level 8, so it's getting much harder. By level 75, I doubt anyone in the room could possibly do it. That's good for science, because we want to push people to the limits. And when you get to the checkpoint at the end, because it's a video game, you're told, well done, 3 stars, you're amazing, you nailed it. It's an advertising company. So what we're able to do with this kind of data is plot that data. So Ed Manley, who you met at the beginning, here's a plot of one of these levels, and we're showing with little red dots all the people who are very young, and in blue the older people. So we can start to see how age affects navigation in a scenario like this. This is 2,000 people. We've collected data from 3.7 million people worldwide. So a vast number of people. This is a tiny fraction, 0.01 of the data. And you can imagine we can get everything here. So you can see somebody a bit old is leading the entire group here, but a whippersnapper gets away and completes it. So this kind of data is really complex. It's allowing us to understand a large number of questions. One of them is, where are the best navigators in the world? And like a lot of health check questionnaires, it tends to be Finland, Norway, Sweden. The Nordic countries are excellent navigators, even when you account for video game skill. And there's a big distribution. So why are they? GDP. The more GDP a country has, the better its navigators will do. That separates from the internal self-sense of how good you are. It turns out Germans think they're the best in the world at navigating, which differs from this. So we're trying to uncover how these patterns interrelate. One question we ask people is, did you grow up in a rural environment or in a city? Do you have an urban brain or a rural brain? Does that make you a better navigator? And what we found is, across the lifespan, that people who grew up in cities are worse, so high on this scale is good, low is bad. There's a consistent effect that growing up in a city is not good for your navigational skill. But if you're sitting here in London, if you grew up in London, it's not a big effect. If you grew up in Germany, 0 effect. If you grew up in America or Canada, there's a big effect. This is the average in the world. It's a really big effect. So if I go back to my previous plot, why? Well, European cities tend to be quite complicated. They have a high entropy, a measure of the complexity of the streets. Manhattan, wow, really low. It's really easy. You want to get to 42nd Street or on 1st Street, it's fine. What we found is that the amount of this graph, this difference in this line, how bad you are from the city, is predicted by the city complexity of a given country. So the more complex the streets in the country, the better city dwellers are at navigating. We get to publish that. Finally, what we're looking at is can we predict the choices people are making as they go through these environments? The 20 million trajectories using machine learning to try and predict why does somebody make an error going down here when they shouldn't have? And we can start looking at things like dementia. What does dementia do for this? My final slide is we're moving this beyond that paradigm to look at how humans in virtual reality navigate changing environments where disruption occurs. And crucially, because I'm a neuroscientist, I want to know what's going on in the brain. We can study rats, and we can collaborate with people like DeepMind to really get into artificial intelligence and map out how it is that trajectories in the world are related to our brains, other species, and the latest quality you can get in artificial intelligence to piece this together to improve the design of our cities. Thank you.